everyone, welcome back for another deep dive. And today we're going to be taking a look at something really fascinating, the world of social intelligence.
Very cool.
Specifically, how our brains are wired to connect with and understand other people.
Yeah.
We've got this really interesting collection of research excerpts and even some audio clips that you sent in.
Awesome.
So we're going to unpack those together and see what we can discover.
Sounds like fun.
Um, one of the things that I always find really interesting is that when we think about social intelligence, it's not just one thing.
Right.
It's this really complex interplay of different systems and processes in the brain.
Absolutely. And it's kind of mind-blowing when you think about how much our brains are doing behind the scenes.
Right. Like we don't even realize all the work that's going on to allow us to connect with each other,
Right.
to understand each other's intentions, to, navigate social situations. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah, it is.
So one of the ways that we explore this idea of social intelligence, particularly with children, is through this really classic test called the Sally-Ann test.
Oh, yeah.
Have you heard of this one?
Of course, the Sally-Ann test is a cornerstone of developmental psychology.
Yeah.
It's, you can't talk about theory of mind without mentioning the Sally-Ann test.
Right. So for our listeners who maybe aren't familiar, can you just give us a quick rundown of what this test involves and what it tells us about how kids develop social understanding?
Sure. So basically in the Sally-Ann test, there are these two dolls, Sally and Ann.
Okay.
And Sally puts a marble in a basket.
Okay.
And then Sally leaves the room. And while she's gone, Ann sneaks in and moves the marble to a box.
Sneaky Ann.
Yeah, so then Sally comes back, and the child who's been watching this whole scene is asked, where will Sally look for her marble?
Okay, I see where this is going.
The trick is that the child knows the marble has been moved, but Sally doesn't. So as the child says Sally will look in the box, it shows they haven't quite grasped yet that Sally has a different belief than their own.
Yeah.
They haven't developed that theory of mind yet.
Right. They're still thinking based on what they know to be true.
Exactly. But if they say Sally will look in the basket where she originally put it, then it demonstrates that they understand Sally's perspective, even though it's inaccurate.
It's like they can step into Sally's shoes and see the world from her point of view.
Exactly. That's theory of mind in action.
So this ability to understand that other people have different beliefs, desires, intentions typically emerges around the age of 5 in most children.
Right.
But research shows it's different for children with autism.
Yes. Studies have shown that only about 20% of autistic children pass the Sally-Ann test.
Wow. That's a pretty significant difference.
It is, and it highlights the particular challenges with theory of mind and autism.
And one thing that I always find fascinating is that children with Down syndrome actually pass the Sally-Ann test at the same rate as typically developing children.
Yeah, that's really interesting, isn't it?
It really shows that, there are different pathways to developing social understanding and that, autism presents a unique set of challenges in this area.
Absolutely.
So if you know someone with autism is struggling with this idea that others have different beliefs, what kind of impact does that have in the real world?
Well, think about it. Imagine trying to navigate social situations without understanding that people may have hidden motives or may interpret things differently than you do.
Right. Like I'm thinking about sarcasm or humor or even just reading between the lines in a conversation.
Exactly. All of that requires theory of mind.
And without it, it can lead to a lot of misunderstandings, miscommunications, and, it can make it really difficult to form social connections.
Right, because you're constantly misinterpreting cues and intentions.
Exactly. So it's really highlighting how fundamental this ability is to being able to function in the social world.
It is.
And, it makes me think about those two brain systems you mentioned earlier, the mentalizing system and the mirror system.
Yes.
Are they both involved in how we understand others, or do they kind of have separate roles?
Well, they're definitely both part of this complex social brain, but they do operate in quite distinct ways.
Okay.
The mentalizing system is kind of like our brain's detective. It's trying to figure out the why behind people's actions, their motives, their beliefs, their desires.
Okay.
It's that higher level reasoning that we were talking about with the Sally-Ann test.
So like really trying to get into someone else's head and understand their perspective.
Exactly.
Okay. What about the mirror system?
Well, the mirror system is more about immediate understanding of actions and basic intentions. And it often works through a process of unconsciously mimicking or mirroring what we see.
Oh, wow. So it's more of an automatic, instinctive kind of response.
Exactly. It's not about consciously thinking through someone's motivations. It's more about feeling and understanding their actions on a visceral level.
That's so cool. So is it like two different pathways in the brain, each tackling social understanding from a different angle?
That's a great way to put it,
Yeah.
yes.
Okay. And what about the brain regions involved? Are they different for each system?
They are. So the mentalizing system relies heavily on areas like the prefrontal cortex,
Okay.
which is involved in planning and complex thought.
Makes sense.
Whereas the mirror system is linked to areas like the premotor cortex, which is involved in planning and executing movements, and also the parietal lobe, which integrates sensory information.
Interesting. So one system is more about thinking and the other is more about doing and feeling.
Yeah, you could say that.
So do these systems ever work together or are they always operating independently?
That's a great question. And there's still much debate about how exactly they interact,
Okay.
but some research suggests that they might actually be inversely correlated at rest.
What does that mean?
It means that the more someone activates one system, the less they activate the other.
Oh, wow. So it's like our brains are choosing which tool to use depending on the social situation.
It could be. Like if you're in a situation that requires you to really think about someone's motives and intentions, you might rely more on the mentalizing system.
Right. And if it's more about reacting to someone's actions in the moment, then the mirror system might take over.
Exactly.
That makes sense.
Yeah, and this is where research on these systems can get a little tricky.
Okay. How so?
Well, they're often studied using very different methods,
Oh, I see.
which can make it hard to directly compare the findings.
So it's kind of like they're speaking different languages,
Right.
which makes it difficult to translate the findings into a unified understanding of how the social brain works.
Precisely.
But by exploring both systems, we can start to get a richer understanding of, all the different ways that our brains are wired to connect with others.
I agree.
Okay, so let's dive a little deeper into this mirror neuron system.
Let's do it.
Because, I gotta say, it's pretty mind-blowing to think that these neurons fire both when we perform an action and when we observe someone else performing that same action.
It's like our brains are literally mirroring the actions we see.
And this mirroring allows us to understand those actions on a deeper level.
Right? It's like we're simulating the experience in our own minds.
And this leads perfectly into, one of the key functions attributed to mirror neurons, which is imitation.
Yes.
Imitation is how we learn so much, especially in our early years.
Absolutely crucial for development.
I mean, think about how babies learn to make facial expressions. They're watching and imitating their caregivers.
Right.
Or how they learn to use utensils.
Or they learn language.
It all starts with observation and imitation.
It's a fundamental mechanism for absorbing knowledge skills, cultural norms from our environment.
It's like this built-in social learning mechanism.
Exactly.
Helping us connect with others and become part of the group.
It's fascinating.
And wouldn't you say that this ability to imitate has played a crucial role in the development of human culture as a whole?
I mean, absolutely. Think about complex skills like tool making or hunting techniques or even storytelling. These couldn't be passed down through genes alone. They require observation, imitation, and refinement over time, building upon the knowledge of those who came before us.
It's like we're standing on the shoulders of giants, and imitation is what allows us to reach those heights.
I love that analogy.
It's pretty remarkable when you think about it.
It is.
So we've talked about how our brains understand others.
Yeah.
But what about our understanding of ourselves? How does social influence shape our sense of self?
The central character in our personal narratives.
Right.
Well, it turns out that our sense of self is incredibly malleable,
Really?
constantly being shaped by the social world around us, often without our conscious awareness.
So it's not this fixed, unchanging entity that we're born with.
No, not at all. It's constantly evolving.
So what part of the brain is involved in this malleable self?
Well, the medial prefrontal cortex, or MPSC for short,
Yeah.
which we touched upon earlier,
Okay.
it's a region involved in self-awareness, self-reflection, processing information about ourselves.
Okay.
But here's the twist. The MPFC is also heavily involved in processing information about others and how we relate to them.
Oh, interesting. So our sense of self is kind of intertwined with our social connections.
Exactly. It's like our brains are constantly comparing ourselves to others, evaluating our place in the social hierarchy.
And all of this is shaping our understanding of who we are.
Precisely.
So it's not just about looking inwards to discover who we are. It's also about absorbing information from our social environment and integrating that into our self-concept.
Right. It's a two-way street.
That's really fascinating. And is there any research that kind of backs up this idea of the malleable self?
Absolutely. There's some really interesting research that demonstrates this. For example, remember the study on hypnosis?
Yeah, I think so. Refresh my memory.
So in this study, Highly suggestible individuals, while under hypnosis, showed changes in their MPFC activity
Okay.
when given suggestions about their identity or abilities.
Wow. So it's like their brains were actually adapting to the suggestions, incorporating them into their sense of self.
That's one interpretation.
And it highlights how powerful social context can be in shaping our self-perception.
Exactly. Another study that illustrates this is the sunscreen study.
Okay.
Tell me more.
So in this study, researchers found that MPFC activity could predict changes in people's sunscreen use, even when their stated intentions didn't match their actions.
So, like, their brains were picking up on subtle social cues and influencing their behavior, even if they weren't fully aware of it.
Precisely.
That's wild.
Mm.
And it makes me think about the power of advertising and marketing.
Oh, yeah.
You know how they're constantly trying to tap into our subconscious desires and influence our purchasing decisions.
Absolutely. And there's a study that actually looked at this called the Neural Focus Group.
What did they find?
Well, they found that MPFC activity while watching advertisements actually predicted the success of ad campaigns
Really?
better than traditional focus groups relying on self-reported opinions.
So our brains are revealing information about our preferences and potential behavior that we might not even be able to articulate ourselves.
It seems that way. That's both fascinating and a little unsettling.
It is, isn't it?
It really underscores the profound impact of social influence on our decisions and actions, even when we think we're acting independently.
It does make you question how much control we really have.
Right. And it makes me wonder about the role of the MPFC. Is it really about reflecting our individuality, or is it more about promoting conformity within a group?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
And one the researchers are still exploring.
I mean, it seems like the MPFC might be more of a mechanism for integrating social norms and promoting that sense of belonging.
It's possible.
Yeah.
And it makes you think about the nature of self-identity.
Yeah. Like, is it really about being unique and standing out, or is it more about fitting in and being part of something larger than ourselves?
It's a complex question with no easy answers.
And it's one that I think we'll continue to grapple with as we learn more about the social brain.
I agree.
So we've talked about mentalizing empathy, the malleable self, but what about self-control?
Well, that's a good one.
How does our brain help us regulate our impulses, resist temptation, especially in social situations where there might be pressure to conform?
Self-control is a crucial aspect of social intelligence.
Right.
It allows us to manage our impulses, delay gratification, and behave in ways that align with our long-term goals, rather than succumbing to immediate desires or social pressure.
It's like our brain's braking system.
Exactly. Helping us navigate the complexities of social life.
So is there a specific region in the brain that's responsible for this braking system?
Well, research points to the ventrolateral prefrontal cortex, or VLP-FAC,
Okay.
particularly in the right hemisphere,
Okay.
as a central hub for self-control.
So it's like our brain's executive control center.
Right. Helping us override those impulsive urges and make decisions that are in our best interest, even when those decisions go against immediate desires or social pressure.
It makes you wonder, though, can this braking system get tired?
That's a great question.
Like, if we're constantly having to exert self-control, does it eventually wear down, leaving us more vulnerable to temptation or social pressure?
It seems so. Research has found that exerting self-control in one domain, like resisting a delicious dessert,
Oh, okay.
can actually reduce our ability to exert self-control in a completely unrelated domain, like solving a difficult puzzle.
Oh, wow. So it's like a muscle that gets tired after a workout.
It is very much like that.
Our self-control reserves are limited and they can be depleted by repeated demands.
Exactly.
So what can we do about that?
Well, just like a muscle, self-control can be strengthened through practice.
Okay. So it's not a fixed capacity. We can actually train our brains to be better at self-regulation.
Absolutely.
How do we do that?
By regularly challenging ourselves, setting small goals, and resisting temptations,
Okay.
we can actually build up our self-control reserves, making us more resilient in the face of challenges and social pressures.
That's encouraging to hear. So it's not about denying ourselves pleasure altogether. It's about learning to balance our immediate desires with our long-term aspirations.
I like that.
It's about finding that sweet spot between indulgence and discipline. Okay, so let's talk about a concept that really challenges our assumptions about willpower and decision-making, the popsicle test.
Oh, the popsicle test, a classic experiment.
Right. For our listeners who haven't heard of this test, can you explain what it involves?
Certainly. Imagine a young child, maybe 3 years old, presented with a choice. They can have a delicious popsicle right now, or they can wait until tomorrow and go to Disneyland for 2 whole days.
It seems like a no-brainer. Who wouldn't choose Disneyland?
You'd think so, wouldn't you?
Right.
But here's the catch. Young children, particularly those under 4, often choose the immediate reward of the popsicle,
Really?
even though it means giving up a much larger, more desirable experience later on.
That's incredible. It really highlights how our brains are wired to prioritize immediate rewards, even when it might not be in our best long-term interest.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's a classic example of the battle between our impulsive desires and our rational decision-making.
Right. And as we've seen, different parts of the brain are involved in these processes.
They are.
So what's happening in the brain during this popsicle test?
Well, researchers are still exploring the precise neural mechanisms,
Okay.
but we can make some inferences based on our understanding of reward processing and self-control.
Okay.
The immediate reward of the popsicle likely triggers activity in the brain's reward system,
Okay.
including areas like the nucleus accumbens and the ventral tegmental area.
Which are associated with feelings of pleasure and motivation.
Exactly. So the brain is essentially lighting up with pleasure at the thought of that sweet, cold popsicle.
And that immediate reward signal can be very powerful.
It can, especially for young children whose prefrontal cortex,
Right?
the part of the brain responsible for higher-level planning and decision-making, is still developing.
So it's not that they're incapable of understanding the concept of delayed gratification.
Right.
It's just that the allure of that immediate reward is just too strong to resist.
Exactly. The brain is weighing the immediate reward of the popsicle against the delayed reward of Disneyland. And in this case, for many young children, the immediate reward often wins.
So it speaks to the powerful influence of our evolutionary history, where prioritizing immediate needs like finding food and avoiding danger was essential for survival.
It does.
But it also highlights the importance of developing self-control strategies as we mature.
Absolutely.
How can we train our brains to be more patient and delay gratification for those greater rewards later on?
That's where our understanding of the brain's braking system comes in.
Okay.
By practicing self-control, setting goals, and resisting temptations, we can strengthen the neural pathways involved in delaying gratification and making choices that align with our long-term goals.
So it's about building up those cognitive muscles, so to speak.
Exactly.
So it's not about denying ourselves pleasure altogether.
Now,
It's about learning to balance our immediate desires with our long-term aspirations.
well said.
It's about finding that sweet spot between indulgence and discipline,
I like that analogy.
between enjoying the popsicle and experiencing the magic of Disneyland.
Exactly.
Okay, but before we all rush out for a popsicle, let's shift gears again and talk about another fascinating aspect of social intelligence,
Okay.
this concept of harmonizing.
Harmonizing.
It's something that often gets overlooked in Western cultures that place a strong emphasis on individuality and self-expression.
Yeah, we tend to value independence and autonomy.
Right, but as you mentioned earlier, harmonizing is essential for successful group living.
It is.
It's about aligning our behavior with the needs and expectations of the group, contributing to a sense of shared purpose and social cohesion.
Right. It's about finding that balance between individual needs and group harmony.
And you mentioned a specific brain region that might be involved in this process of harmonizing,
Okay.
the medial prefrontal cortex, or MPFC.
Yes.
The same region we discussed in relation to self-awareness and social influence.
It's remarkable how this one brain region seems to be involved in so many different aspects of our social lives.
It really is. So the MPFC seems to play a key role in assimilating group values and promoting conformity.
It does. It's almost as though this region is helping us become the kind of people our social group wants us to be, contributing to a sense of belonging and shared identity.
That's a remarkable thought. So our sense of self, rather than being solely about our unique individuality, might actually be more of a reflection of our social environment and the groups we identify with.
That's a humbling concept.
It really is. It challenges our Western notions of rugged individualism
It does.
and suggests that our identities are far more intertwined with our social groups than we often realize.
Much more than we like to admit sometimes.
Right. It makes you wonder about the nature of conformity. Is it always a bad thing, as we often assume?
Right.
Or can it sometimes be beneficial for both the individual and the group?
That's a complex question, and the answer likely depends on the specific context.
Of course.
Conformity can certainly stifle creativity and individuality.
If it leads to blind obedience or the suppression of unique perspectives.
Exactly. But it can also be a powerful force for social cohesion and cooperation.
Enabling groups to function effectively and achieve common goals.
Right. It's about finding that delicate balance
Right.
between expressing our uniqueness and contributing to the harmony of the group.
It's like we're constantly calibrating our sense of self based on the social feedback we receive,
Right.
trying to find that sweet spot where we can be both unique individuals and valued members of a group.
Exactly.
It's a delicate dance,
It is.
but it's one that our brains are remarkably equipped to handle.
I agree.
You know, it's fascinating to consider how all of these different systems and processes are working together to shape our social experiences.
It really is.
And as we continue to delve deeper into the social brain, I think we're going to uncover even more amazing insights about what it means to be human.
I can't wait to see what we discover next.
So it's like we're constantly trying to find that balance, right?
Yeah.
Between fitting in and standing out.
Yeah, and our brains are constantly working to make sense of it all.
Speaking of fitting in and standing out, let's talk about autism for a bit. You mentioned this really interesting concept called the intense world hypothesis.
Yeah.
How does that differ from the traditional view of autism as a theory of mind deficit?
Okay, so the older theory kind of focused primarily on, those challenges that autistic individuals face when it comes to understanding the mental states of others.
Right, like they struggle with that Sally Ann test.
Exactly. But the intense world hypothesis offers a different perspective.
Okay.
It suggests that autistic individuals aren't actually lacking in social understanding,
Okay.
but rather they experience the world, especially those social stimuli, with heightened intensity.
So instead of a deficit in understanding, it's more like an overload of information.
Exactly. Imagine experiencing, everyday sights and sounds and social interactions as just overwhelmingly vivid and intense.
Wow, that would be a lot to handle.
It would. And so the intense world hypothesis proposes that, many of the social behaviors that we see in autism, like avoiding eye contact or seeking out quiet environments, those are actually coping mechanisms.
Okay, to kind of manage that sensory and social overload.
Precisely.
That's a really powerful shift in perspective.
It is.
What kind of evidence is there to support this hypothesis?
Well, there's growing evidence to support this idea. For example, studies using brain imaging have shown that when autistic individuals do make eye contact,
Okay.
their amygdala, which is a brain region associated with processing emotions and threats,
Right.
it shows
Right.
increased activity.
So it's like eye contact is actually a really intense experience for them.
It can be, and perhaps even distressing.
Okay.
So they might avoid it as a way to regulate their sensory input.
It's not about disinterest in social cues then.
Down.
It's more about protecting themselves from feeling overwhelmed.
Exactly.
Does this heightened sensitivity apply to other social stimuli as well?
It seems so.
Yeah.
Remember we were talking about mirror neurons and imitation? Well, interestingly, studies using automatic imitation paradigms, where the focus is on unconscious mimicry rather than intentional understanding of mental states, have found that autistic individuals actually show stronger automatic imitation effects than typically developing individuals.
Wow, really? I would have thought it would be the opposite if they struggle with social understanding.
I know it seems counterintuitive, but it actually supports the intense world hypothesis.
Okay, how so?
Well, if their mirror neuron system is more sensitive, it means they're picking up on and processing social cues,
Okay.
even those subtle ones, to a greater degree.
So they're not missing those cues. They're actually hyper aware of them.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And this heightened sensitivity could contribute to that feeling of being overwhelmed in social situations,
Right.
leading them to develop strategies to manage that overload.
It makes you wonder if we can actually learn something from the experiences of autistic individuals.
Right.
To better understand how the social brain works in general.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think studying both typical and atypical brain development can offer really valuable insights into the mechanisms underlying social behavior.
Right, and how those mechanisms can vary across individuals.
Precisely.
So we've talked about how our brains understand others,
Yeah.
but what about our understanding of ourselves?
Okay.
How does social influence shape our sense of self?
The self,
Right.
the central character in our personal narratives.
It turns out that our sense of self is incredibly malleable,
It is.
constantly being shaped by the social world around us, often without our conscious awareness.
It's like we're constantly adapting and evolving in response to the people and experiences in our lives.
That's a fascinating idea.
It is.
It challenges the notion that our sense of self is something fixed and unchanging.
Right. It's not like we're born with a fully formed sense of self that stays the same throughout our lives.
So what part of the brain is involved in this malleable self?
Well, the medial prefrontal cortex, or MPFC for short, which we touched upon earlier, plays a key role in this process.
It's involved in self-awareness, self-reflection, processing information about ourselves.
Exactly.
But here's the twist.
Okay.
The MPFC is also heavily involved in processing information about others and how we relate to them.
It's almost as if our sense of self is intertwined with our social connections.
So it's not just about looking inwards to discover who we are.
Right.
It's also about absorbing information from our social environment and integrating it into our self-concept.
It's a two-way street.
That's really fascinating.
It is.
And is there any research that kind of backs up this idea of the malleable self?
Absolutely. There's some fascinating research that demonstrates this. For example, you remember the study on hypnosis?
Yeah, I think so. Remind me.
Okay, so in this study, they took highly suggestible individuals, and while under hypnosis, they showed changes in their MPFC activity
Okay.
when they were given suggestions about their identity or abilities.
So it's like their brains were actually adapting to those suggestions,
Yeah.
incorporating them into their sense of self.
That's one interpretation. And it really highlights how powerful social context can be in shaping our self-perception.
Absolutely.
Another study that illustrates this is the sunscreen study.
Okay, tell me about that one.
So in this study, researchers found that MPFC activity could predict changes in people's sunscreen use, even when their stated intentions didn't match their actions.
So it's like their brains were picking up on subtle social cues and influencing their behavior,
Right.
even if they weren't fully aware of it.
Precisely.
That's wild. And it makes me think about, the power of advertising and marketing.
Oh, yeah.
You know how they're constantly trying to tap into our subconscious desires
Right?
and influence our purchasing decisions.
Absolutely. And there's actually a study that looked at this
Okay.
called the Neural Focus Group.
What did they find?
Well, they found that MPFC activity
Hmm.
while watching advertisements actually predicted the success of ad campaigns,
Really?
better than traditional focus groups relying on self-reported opinions.
So our brains are revealing information about our preferences and potential behavior
Yeah.
that we might not even be able to articulate ourselves.
It seems that way.
That's both fascinating and a little unsettling.
It is, isn't it?
It really underscores that profound impact of social influence
Right.
on our decisions and actions, even when we think we're acting independently.
It makes you wonder how much control we really have.
Right, and it makes me wonder, about the role of the MPFC.
Okay.
Is it really about reflecting our individuality, or is it more about promoting conformity within a group?
That's a great question, and one that researchers are still exploring. But it seems like the MPFC might be more of a mechanism for integrating social norms and promoting that sense of belonging.
Right, like it's helping us fit in.
Exactly.
And it makes you think about the nature of self-identity.
Right.
Like, is it really about being unique and standing out?
Yeah.
Or is it more about fitting in and being part of something larger than ourselves?
It's a complex question with no easy answers, and it's one that I think we'll continue to grapple with as we learn more about the social brain.
Yeah, it really makes you think about, what it means to be ourselves.
It does.
And how much of that is shaped by our social connections.
Absolutely.
That's like this idea that we've been talking, this malleable self.
Right?
And it makes me think about how we often talk about, being true to ourselves as if it means, standing apart from the crowd
Right.
and rejecting social influence. But what if, as this research suggests,
Yeah.
our true selves are actually shaped by our connections with others?
It's an interesting thought, isn't it?
It is. It's almost like a paradox.
It is.
We're seeking authenticity and individuality,
Right.
but our sense of self is inherently intertwined with our social experiences.
I think it's about finding that balance,
Okay.
between expressing our own unique individuality
Uh-huh.
and recognizing that our sense of self is also shaped by those connections that we have with others.
Right. It's not an either-or proposition.
Exactly.
It's about finding that sweet spot between,
Yeah.
expressing our individuality and then also harmonizing with the groups that we choose to be a part of.
And being mindful of the influences, that we allow into our lives.
That makes a lot of sense.
It's really about, recognizing that our brains are wired for connection
Right.
and that social influence is a powerful force.
It is.
It's not something to be afraid of.
Right.
It's just something to be aware of.
Well, this has been such an insightful journey
It had
into the social brain. We've
covered a lot.
we have from mirror neurons
Uh-huh.
to the malleable self
To the intense world hypothesis.
to the intense world hypothesis to our brain's braking system.
Yeah.
I mean, we've uncovered so many fascinating insights
We have.
into how our brains are wired for connection.
And this is really just the tip of the iceberg.
Right.
I mean, the field of social neuroscience is constantly evolving.
Absolutely.
There are new discoveries being made all the time.
So as you our listener continue exploring the world of social intelligence.
Yes.
Remember to stay curious,
Always be curious.
ask questions,
Yes.
and challenge assumptions.
Because the journey of understanding yourself and your place in the world is an ongoing and fascinating one.
Absolutely.
And don't forget to connect with others.
Yes.
Our social connections are not just a source of joy and support,
Right.
but they're also a vital part of what makes us human.
So well said. It's been an absolute pleasure diving deep into this topic with you today.
Likewise.
We hope you've enjoyed this exploration of the social brain as much as we have.
Me too.
And until next time, keep those social brains buzzing.
And keep those deep dives going.
Exactly. We'll see you next time.